Okay. So before I assume that like you're coming in here as blank slates waiting to be spoken at, which hardly ever anyone is, I'd love to hear from a couple of you about what you're hoping to learn today about the object relations. And I'm just going to maybe pick one or two people to kick us off, if that's okay. So, Madeleine, I'd like to ask you, what brings you here today about this topic?
Ingrid, I'm actually very open. So, I mean, I've been exposed to object relations before, but when you said, you're going to go very deep and very technical, I was actually very excited. So the more detail, the more insight, personal awareness, just really very keen to learn from you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Madeleine. Anyone want to add to that? I'm going to call on you, Michael.
Yeah, hi. I really enjoyed your previous exposition of object relations and stuff. I remember you said you'd learned some of the things since you've made that video. So I'm very interested in what you've learned. It seems to be, it's one of those things that is really rich, but I never seem to get the whole thing.
Yes.
Massive.
It really is. It is rich and complex. And I also feel the same way. I feel as though I've really only got quite a superficial understanding of it still. And there's still a lot more learning happening, especially as we understand more about trauma. So, yeah, thank you. I don't think I'm an expert in object relations at all, but I can at least give a bit of an exposition, I hope, that takes people a bit further in, their exploration. Yeah, thank you. Anna? I'm asking Anna in Mexico.
Yeah, just to echo what Michael said, I don't think I have a good grasp on object relations. I was very intrigued. I think we've talked about this, Ingrid, like Josh Levine laid it out as like the three centers develop sequentially. So it's like first the gut, right? Or the body, boundaries, autonomy limits, then feelings, which has to do with like, attention. Who am I? Like, how do my character or my caregivers see me? How can I get what I want? And then cognition happening in the mind. And he relates the object relations to the development of those three centers. And I think that's really interesting. And, as someone who's a frustration type, I don't have a good handle on rejection and attachment as I should. So I think, to me, I have a lot of gaps in what I understand about object relations.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's very helpful. I haven't got any particular slides on that, but I love that reference to the three centers because it's the inner triangle. And in object relations, they do speak about that it starts with 9, then 3, then 6. So I hope I will remember to come back to that because it does actually help us understand a lot. And in the trauma work, we are also starting with the body as the absolute foundation. The body and the nervous system is where we originally get our primary differentiation of a sense of self, where there's an impingement on our instinctual needs. We aren't fed on time. We are uncomfortable, hungry, feel alone, whatever it is. We experience our primary traumatization in the body. And that's at a nervous system level where we have to process deficits in the early holding environment first. And then, the feelings are part of the nervous system and they're definitely in the body as well. But I think that sequence is quite a helpful way of thinking. Yeah, the attachment stuff starts with physicality? Am I held? How am I held? What is the quality of touch? How am I received when I'm picked up, crying? All of that stuff. How much sensitivity is there to my sensitive nervous system as an infant? All of that stuff. So thank you for that. Thanks very much. I'm glad I asked you. And then the inner work, also being three-centered around healing the object relations wounding, that there are particular modalities and ways of addressing the wounding in each of those three centers. And in the trauma work, really appreciating that it's got to be a combination of bottom up, from the body up, and the mind down. That just telling our stories cognitively or understanding the Enneagram is not really going to get us very far at all. So understanding our ego structure and being able to notice our triggers, yeah, it's helpful as a start for pattern interruption. But the actual triggering in the nervous system of these object relations wounds requires a different starting point for healing. And when we're dealing with early attachment wounding, like the object relations, there has to be a somatic element to it, because it started in the body. It started with feelings of unsafety or misattunement or neglect, but we'll get into some of that just now. So thank you. Anyone else want to say anything about what you're hoping to get out of today? Who's talking?
Yes, this is Rachel.
Oh, thanks, Rachel. Yeah.
I was gonna say that was already really interesting. I saw your description and it looked really fascinating. So I'm like, this is really interesting. And lucky I saw this post in time. And so I thought I would come and I guess curiosity, if I had to pick a single word, is, what kind of drives me. I think I'm very fascinated by the topic and see what you have to say about it, or see what can be learned about it in a sense. And yeah.
Cool. Okay, thank you. Any last thoughts popping up of what you really want to know? And hopefully I can bear that in mind. Any particular areas of confusion, like where you've encountered the object relations before and there's something that just hasn't made sense to you? Maybe I could touch on something there as well. Like originally for me, what the hell does object mean at the most basic level? What do you mean by object? Does that mean my mother? So that's the first place I'm going to start. Okay, well, if you want to jump in and stop me and ask questions or anything, please do. I'll try my best. And what's in the chat here? Okay, my name might need to switch. Okay, cool. So let me go into some content, and having a smaller group is also cool because maybe we can get to stop and chat about some examples along the way. And I'd also love us to talk about case studies. This group very much being coaching community oriented. Okay, so at the most basic level, developing a psyche in relation to others in the childhood environment. So psyche in psychology meaning self and a sense of self. And that is a vast word. There are hundreds and hundreds of models of the psyche. And if you think about it, humans have been grappling with this idea of what is a person since we first became self-conscious as embodied primates. So we don't really know what we are and how we work, and this is all continuously evolving. The Enneagram is an incredible system for helping us to try and figure out what we are and how we work. But anything here that has any structural element, just bear in mind the map is not the territory. And there are lots of different ways of thinking about the human psyche and the human experience. So object relations comes from a kind of Western psychological tradition, can be quite individualistic. And something Russ said last night that I really loved is that in ancient Egypt and in ancient Greece, there was no word for the living body while we're living in it. The Greeks used the word soma, but they only used it for dead bodies. And there's a similar thing in ancient Egypt. So there wasn't this thing of me and my body. So that's just an example of how our ways of thinking about what we are, how we operate, our relationships evolve over time and are kind of socio-historically embedded. So I could come and tell you everything from a Freudian perspective, and you might think, oh, that's true, or a Jungian, or an object relations, or an Enneagram. So just bear in mind when you're hearing this stuff that it's one particular representation of how we operate, and to remain open to alternative views of what we are. Like if you think about yourself as embedded in a relational field, as embodied, as evolved on this earth to breathe this air, and that we're in an emotional field, you might think differently about this, than if you take it at face value, especially with these schematic models, that actually bear no resemblance to a living human being. So just that caveat always feels kind of important to me, because sometimes we take the Enneagram a bit literally, almost as if there is such a thing in existence as an ego structure, rather than a process of patterns, reactivity, patterns of response in information processing and where we place our awareness. So you think about those two different ways of thinking about the psyche. If you think about it as information processing real time and certain ways of truncating the information that comes in versus a structure, you can see how that might impact how you speak to a client, how you engage with them, and how you think about yourself. Like, do you feel as though there's structures in yourself to be changed, which is kind of, is that really true? Or are there ways in which you want to be receptive to different kinds of information in yourself and in the world? So that's a little bit of a digression, but kind of feels important if we're going to hold the system in a way that isn't an imposition, like this is how it is, because that has implications. So I included this little primate here because we tend to forget that we're animals. We really are animals. And the object relation starts with us being animals, that we have the survival need to be related to others, to be cared for by others, to be in community, to be part of a troop, a tribe, and that is foundational to our sense of self and identity. So with humans and our complicated prefrontal cortex, it's not just about, grooming each other and hanging out. We develop language, and then there's all this abstraction and complexity, and we have a sense of self, and then we worry about the sense of self. Like, I doubt very many baby gorillas are worrying about their image, as they grow up and they become an adolescent. That might play out in other ways, like how do I belong and who's got power and who hasn't. But with human beings, all of this stuff, goes to a totally next level where we start having mental representations that we're grappling with about who am I? But it starts with this basic foundational embodied animal need to be loved, to be held, to be in contact, to feel safe. So I always like boiling it down to basic things, safety and connection. And in my marriage counseling training, that was what was always emphasized, is at the most fundamental level, we want safety and connection. And most of what we get up to is trying to figure out how to get that. So objects in object relations are the primary figures that we encounter in our early life that lead to us developing a sense of self. And that is one of the objects. So I'll map this out for you in a way that's a little bit clearer. But let's just talk about the external objects firstly. So the external objects that we encounter as infants, we're going to have a nurturing archetype, we encounter an authority archetype, and we encounter some kind of family system or home. And these things aren't always neatly split out, and they aren't always a one-to-one relationship. They aren't gender specific. But in object relations, specifically from an Enneagram perspective, these are the three kind of archetypes that we're working with. And they map onto the types in quite interesting ways. So all of us are going to, in our earliest caregiving and holding environments, experience some form of nurturing. And it's going to have wonderful elements to it that nurture and support us. We all made it to adulthood, and there are other areas in which there are going to be deficits. Then we're going to find our orientation in the world. There's an authority archetype that gives us protection and guidance. And all of us are going to have experienced that to some extent or another. What's right or wrong? What are the shoulds? What is the should context in which we live? What are the norms? What are the kinds of values that we have to orient ourselves to? What's real? What's trustworthy? How do we know? So there are those kinds of figures that arrive in our early life. And then the overall family system or home is, how do we feel embedded in that environment? What do we construe as home? What does home feel like? For an infant, their world is very small, but we start to form impressions about what the world is like when we're very little. And, we are largely contained in that environment for our formative years. So we don't really know until much later that there are other types of homes, there are other types of realities with different norms to ours, with different emotional culture. I don't know if you remember that as a child, when you start going to play at friends' houses, and then you discover they've got such a different family culture, and they do things differently, and they hold hands and say grace, and stuff like that. Well, for me, that was totally weird. I didn't grow up like that, and vice versa. There are things that are done and not done, and also the emotional quality. How much freedom is there? How much self-expression is allowed? Is it strict? Is it quiet? Is it loud and chaotic? So the family system or home is also an object that we encounter in early life. How much visibility do people have? How much freedom are they given? And what Russ was saying yesterday is that as we do this Enneagram work, the inner work, and when we're working with clients in coaching or therapy or spiritual direction, or wherever you are applying the Enneagram, we go deeper and younger as we progress. And this is why I like the object relations to have in my understanding of time. Because with the heart wounds, it's a very, very primary layer of conditioning. And I actually see the object relations dynamics as where the heart wounds come from. So the heart wounds we sometimes think of as the core wound, the object relations are where does the heart wound come from? And that for me has been a very, very valuable understanding of what needs to be healed and what needs to be noticed. And our type kicks in around these things. So when we encounter certain triggers in our lives, they are somehow matching our early object relations wounding. And then we feel the heart wound, and then our type kicks in, is I can't take this, I can't handle this, I've got to fix this in some way or another, and we start doing our type. So the nature of our core wound, the nature of the heart wound is very much related to our early object relations experience. So I've got this fancy schematic here to try and help us understand this. These three early objects, I think these three here, just seeing it as those three is quite oversimplified. It's quite neat. It's quite helpful. There is a difference between nurturing and authority. There are different ways in which those figures will help us interface with reality and form a sense of self. But let's just be aware that life is a lot more complicated than that. So if I show you this fancy picture that I created here, what it shows here is if you think about this big yellow circle as the self and the ego, we've got our true self or essence, which is our pure awareness, our pure consciousness. So when we're able to drop back into our pure awareness, we're able to see all our patterns and triggers, and the other parts of our psyche get relativized. We're able to defamiliarize them and say, wow, I wonder why I acted like that in that situation. I wonder why I acted so tough. That when we pull back into an inner observer, we're able to see the other parts of our psyche more clearly. So when I talk about true self, essence, pure awareness, I'm talking about that part of us where we're able to drop back into a part of ourselves that isn't triggered. So that's why that's there. Then the other layer that I've got here of the circle is the more psychological part of ourselves, which is our emotions, our raw feelings, our thoughts, our belief systems, the part of ourself that is triggered, the ego strategy, our Enneagram type, all of that stuff lives in the ego part of ourself. And you've seen how I create these pictures in the past. Most of you have seen this. Our psyche is it's quite helpful to think of it as having layers. And in various spiritual traditions, you have that as well. Like you have the core essential nature, and then gradually these layers of ego strategies and defenses on the outside and masks. So a lot of our metaphors are inside to outside. So that's why I've represented it this way. So what you find is there's the self. And if you think about the infant coming in as pure awareness, undifferentiated awareness, the world then starts impinging on that awareness and experiences are had. So there's a child with the sensitivity of a body, sensitivity of feeling, and open awareness, arriving on planet Earth and then having experiences. So I've represented the having of experiences as these blue arrows touch the psyche of the infant. So it'll be hunger, it'll be noise, it'll be discomfort, it'll be fear, loud noises, bright lights, there are all kinds of things. You've basically got a totally pure nervous system in a body where the child has no sense of self. The child can't say, oh, mommy's tired, she's not coming to feed me, I'm sure she'll be here in 5 minutes. Infant has zero ability to do that. It's just raw experience impinging on instinct, the nervous system, and awareness. So you can think of that as the three centers of intelligence as well. The nervous system and the instincts are being met either with nurturing and holding or with deficits, but definitely guaranteed some deficits. You're never going to get perfect holding. You've never met a baby who doesn't cry. That's the signal that they've got a need. But at the same time, they're getting a pattern of, oh, you know, I am going to be fed. I am going to be held, or not. Some babies are going to discover that when they cry, they encounter, you know, anger or even get shaken, you know, those kind of things. So what's happening is we've got caregivers and figures in the context that the baby is encountering. And the way in which that environment interacts with the child starts forming the child's sense of what is. So what is real? What is going on here? What is reality? Who am I? Who are they? How much love is there in the world? So I'm using language. Obviously, a baby doesn't have that. But the baby's going to have a sense of, I am loved and held. And when I cry, somebody's going to come soon and pick me up and look at me lovingly and saying, oh, are you okay? As opposed to the opposite end of the spectrum, where nobody comes, maybe, or somebody comes, but they're really irritated, or somebody comes and they're completely out of it because they're a heroin addict, who knows? But you've got whatever the baby experiences, it's these blue arrows, and in an early caregiver environment, it's not isolated experiences, it's chronic experiences of similar things, because that parent is that parent. So if you have a parent who's a highly stressed, anxious parent, it's not going to be, you know, every 6 months she's a bit irritated. There's a chronic emotional quality to the interaction. It's going to be again and again and again and again, maybe 40 times a day, that the client, that the baby, that is the baby client, that the client encounters a certain kind of deficit and forms a sense of self and the other in that holding environment. And every parent has got some kind of unhealed trauma and wounds of their own. They've maybe had some severe adverse childhood experiences. If you know the ACEs, some people have a 10 out of 10 score on the ACEs, or 8 or 9. And if you have been traumatized, then, you know, if you've got an ACEs score higher than 4, you're that much more likely to have all kinds of things, depression. There's so much there. I'm not going to go there now. But if you just think about your own grandparents, the stories that you heard about them, the context that they grew up in, and how much healing did they have? What modalities were they exposed to? Did they get to go to yoga and on healing retreats and Ayurveda? What did they do? How did they cope with what they went through? And some of it was really hectic stuff, you know, or, you know, having alcoholic parents, and you hear these little snippets of stories, then you can hardly be surprised that they're coming into relationships with us with their deficits and their misattunement, their inability to meet us as a person with needs, as a person with feelings. They've also been conditioned, you know, so we experience our parents, they experience theirs, and then in our parenting, we also going to be these people, you know. As a 7 mother, misattunement is a big thing, you know. How do I be truly present with a crying infant as a 7? You know, it's really hard to stay present and to be emotionally connected. So we're going to be carrying our time into our relationships as parents, and enacting our deficits forward. So these, and I don't want to say that in a way that makes us feel bad. Every single person has an Enneagram type, and every single child has an Enneagram type. We can't get it right. You know, if you think perfect is right, it's not possible. I was with someone on this breakout room last night in Russ's program, and she was talking about one of the biggest breakthroughs she had in her Enneagram journey was realizing that she could not be the perfect parent. So she discovered the Enneagram when her kids were quite young, and she thought that she could now be the perfect parent so that they didn't end up with any traumatization. And one of her big liberations in her Enneagram journey was to realize the mere fact of being human on this earth, in a body, in a nervous system, entails some level of traumatization. It can be small t trauma of somebody not really paying attention when you got hurt and never really being sensitive to that, like, oh, you're fine, come, yeah, kiss it better, let's go. You know, that's a small t trauma if nobody ever takes your pain seriously. So I really want to also make that clear, is a lot of people think trauma is an overused word, and I think it is if we don't make the distinction between chronic small t trauma or deficits in attunement and care and holding and connection and big traumatic events. So we're dealing with these caregivers who are bringing these various forms of impingement or deficit to us. So if you look at this one, misattunement, all of us experience some form of misattunement. So if we just look at the image types, 2s, misattunement to their feelings. Your feelings don't matter, someone else's feelings matter. The mother with postnatal depression, or the other child, or whoever it is. You know, there's misattunement to your feelings, they don't matter, so you better just get rid of them. For a 3, your feelings don't matter. How are feelings helpful? No, get over it, get on with it. I've coached so many 3s, and when I talk about the childhood patterns, you know, in debriefings and things, just abstractly say, yeah, the Enneagram talks about how we needed this adaptive strategy because it's like feelings are not practical. And 3s learn that very, very young. Be competent. Don't feel, be competent. Get on with it. So that's a certain deficit in attunement that leads to a certain feeling style. And I'm going in the feeling center because we've all got a feeling center and a tri-type element. And then for Enneagram 4 is, you know, you're not seen, you're not visible. Do you really even exist? Does anyone take an interest in who you really are? Or is something else just that much more important than you, that much more special, whether it's somebody else or, you know, someone else's needs? There's just not attunement to the unfolding of you as an individual human being who is innately interesting and special, as, wow, you're my child. Who are you? So that's the big deficit for 4. So what happens is we experience these deficits, and in relation to those deficits, we develop certain internalized representations of the other, of ourself, and of the household, the world, and life in general. So we start getting a picture of, okay, so caregivers in general are like this. And it's not a conscious belief, it's an unconscious belief. But we start to experience certain formations of archetypes in the self. So if you think about your internalized representation of the archetype of the mother, the archetype of the feminine, of the nurturing figure. What is your archetype for that figure? Is it somebody powerful and generative and creative? Is it somebody weak? Is it somebody pathetic? Is it, you've got certain internalized representations. When I say the word mother, things are going to come up for you. It could be punitive, dangerous, rejecting, vacant, weak, whatever it is. So if you do that for yourself now, like nurturing archetype, let's just use mother as an example. No. The ones that come up for me immediately are weak and helpless. And when you start understanding the 7 ego pattern, it's very much a disidentification from the feminine. So for 7s, 8s, and 3s, there's a disidentification from the nurturing archetype. It's like, I don't want to be soft because soft equals weak and helpless. I don't want to be sensitive because sensitive equals vulnerable and pathetic, or whatever. So if you think about just that one, if you've got no 7, 8, or 3 in your tritype, then likely you have a different sense of the feminine or the nurturing figure. But if you've got 7, 8, or 3 in your tritype, I'd put some money on the fact that you think of the feminine as something that you, at least historically, pushed away and disavowed as either ineffectual, weak, helpless, pathetic, dependent, that there's a disavowal of that archetype. So you're going to have an internal representations of these different objects. So I've got an internal object in my head now of nurturing. So the mother's an object. I internalize a representation, and I've got an object in my head now, nurturing archetype, feminine equals weak. So that's an object. And then the object relations translate then into my relationship with that archetype in my own psyche and my relationship with my own heart and my relationships in the world and the way in which I bring that understanding into future relationships. So I'll show you just now how that works. So we start getting the internalized representations of these others and of these archetypes. If it's the home and the world, I might grow up with a sense of the world is a very dangerous place. So if maybe for a 9, if I grow up in a very high conflict household, or a 1, I might have grown in a very chaotic household, or maybe a very rigid environment. So I'm going to be forming a sense of what is the world like based on how the household is. And that's going to become an internal object. And then also the authority figure as well. Is an authority figure dangerous and unpredictable? Is there a consistent and stable source of guidance? Or is authority something that I have to keep guessing what's the right thing to do around here? Am I going to get in trouble easily or not? So if you've got 1, 2, or 6, those types have historically wrestled with issues with the authority archetype. Like what's good, what's right, what should I be doing? There's a huge big should at the heart of 1, 2, and 6, because there was some authority issue of one kind or another. And these things take multiple forms, and they take different forms in different cultures. But I cannot tell you how many 1s, 2s, and 6s I've coached who grew up in authoritarian households, or like had a school headmaster as a father or a pastor, or those kinds of authoritarian structures, or in some cases with an Enneagram 1, a completely chaotic environment where they had to compensate for the chaos. So what happens is we start internalizing representations of the archetypes. So nurturing, authority, environment, those then become things that we start relating to in our own mind. And they become what's called heuristics. And that's like a rule of thumb. So that later on, when I encounter an authority figure, I don't encounter a human being. I don't encounter this unique boss and what's my relationship with this actual person? How are we going to work together? I encounter my own representation of boss. So they walk in and I just see boss. I see my internalized representation of boss, and I start being emotionally in relationship with my object, my internalized archetypal object, and not with the actual person. So these internalized representations are very, very important because we relate to them more than we're relating to the actual person. We're relating to the internalized training that we've had of a nurturing figure or of an authority figure. Like for 7, 8, and 3, say, when you encounter somebody, I don't know if you relate to this, but encountering someone very soft, very sensitive, very feeling, very nurturing, you know, for someone who's a 7, 8, or 3 who hasn't done a lot of work and noticed this stuff, there's like a you know, get away from me. Now, what is this? 8s will immediately kind of dismiss it. And I don't want to, no, not all 8s, some 8s, and some of the time, depending on where they are and, you know, what they've experienced. 7s I've seen be very jaded and cynical in the face of softness. And if you're a coach and you're a soft type of person and gentle and kind, you may have noticed that if you try and coach a 7, 8, or 3 who's disavowed that softness, they will have a resistance to that. And, you know, they won't soften because you're offering that. They're actually more likely to you know, dissociate or be skeptical or whatever it is. So just being aware that that person is relating to their internalized object, the soft and the nurturing. And if you try and bring them into relationship with that softness, they don't want to. They've got negative associations and they've got resistances to it, and for very, very good reasons. So if you're trying to get through someone's defense mechanisms, you've got to be aware that there's such primary unconscious stuff going on there that, you know, you've got to use different ways of working to be able to get them to connect with that archetype in a different way, to heal the archetype, to heal their relationship with the archetype. So for 7s, 8s, and 3s, a huge part of this work is healing the relationship with sensitivity and the idea of sensitivity and the experience of sensitivity. So as 7, 8, and 3, we realize, oh, I'm not weak, helpless, and pathetic if I'm soft. That's a damaged archetype. It's a distorted archetype. It's a distorted internal object based on what I experienced pre-verbally. And, you know, when we're doing trauma-informed work, we're going to be very sensitive to this as we start to realize what these object relations really mean and what we're dealing with at a deep emotional level. At a very deep emotional level, we're dealing with disconnections from different centers of intelligence in ourselves and the internalized objects in relation to some of these areas of life. Like 9s, 4s, and 5s in the, sure, I'm careful not to go into all kinds of technicality, but a sense that there's not much holding here. There's not much support for me to be in the world. So I've got a damaged relationship with home and life. So yeah, just to give you a sense of that, basically what this whole picture is describing, on the far right, there's the field in which the child lives socio-historically. There's intergenerational trauma, there's conditioning, there's everything in the human ethnosphere that's going on, everything. The norms, the values of the culture, the things the parents went through. This is the kind of soup of society and culture that we're all swimming in at any time in history, and depending on our geography. Our parents and caregivers and context within that soup. So we're born into that as kind of pure awareness, and in relation to these impingements and deficits that we experience, firstly, at a body level, at a nervous system level. Then the thoughts and imagery that we start forming, the feelings that we experience, we start developing internal objects. And I didn't get to this piece yet, but it's important, is we start developing inner parts. If you bring in IFS, that we then deploy as our adaptive strategy. So when we look at these red arrows, what that represents is the strategies that we formulate to be able to cope with the deficits in our holding environment. So this is our ego formation process, is if our relationship with the nurturing archetype is never actually meeting our need for safety, or to feel protected, or to feel a sense of connection. Like say for an Enneagram 8, the nurturing figure isn't protective. The nurturing figure isn't protecting the child enough, and the child isn't experiencing a quality of holding and security that they can relax. There's some kind of injustice or power imbalance, or maybe that parent is experiencing abuse and isn't standing up for herself, whatever it is. But the child can't trust the nurturing figure. So in that environment, the child starts learning, don't trust, don't trust, don't trust, don't trust. I've got to toughen up, I've got to toughen up, I've got to toughen up. So in that context, say here, there's a hardened caregiver in the environment, and the child learns that being strong is a good adaptive strategy. There's a deficit in sensitivity and protection. So the child learns, okay, I'm going to toughen up, and I'm going to deploy this adaptive strategy of toughness. And if we're learning that from tiny, then we're 2, then we're 3, then we're 4, and it starts getting reinforced and reinforced. If you're constantly getting the tacit message as a child, toughen up, toughen up, toughen up, get over yourself, go and wipe those tears off your face, go and get rid of that ugly face. You know, those are the kinds of messages people are getting to some extent or another. The adaptive strategy or survival style is what we deploy in response to this continuous experience of the object. And that's our ego strategy. Those are our defensive patterns of our time. So you can see that our whole ego emerges from this object relations field in our very early childhood. So nurturing figure, nurturing object, I internalize an object in my mind. I've got an internal representation of that object, the nurturing object, internal representation of the authority object. And I've got an internalized representation that I've learned of myself. And the thing about the self object is that it involves over-identifications and under-identifications. So if I go back to the 837 example, I over-identify with toughness because I had to. So, okay, now I'm a tough person. Life is tough. I'm tough. I don't do feelings. How many times in coaching kind of assertive type 783, 837 clients, I don't do feelings. They've over-identified with that toughness because that was a really helpful adaptive strategy in their object relations context. So then I've got the object of the self. That's an idea. It's an objectified sense of self that now I'm deploying that idea of myself. And there's a tough part that goes with it. So I've brought in a bit of inner parts language here. Is when I'm under stress, guess what? That very tough inner part that I have is the one that I deploy. That one comes onto the stage, and it's like, now I'm the boss, and I'm playing boss, and I'm unconsciously over-identified with the tough one. I'm like, okay, no, sorry, I don't have time. This needs to get done today. And I'm deploying that persona of the strong, tough one. And I'm blended with it in IFS language. I'm identified with it. I actually think that that is me. I don't know that I actually have feelings because I disconnected from them when I was 5. So that deployed persona, that is our ego strategy, developed through the object relations, then becomes our default. And I like to think of these parts, we've got a lot of different parts in us, and they don't always agree. They've got different agendas, they've got different strategies. But if we become aware of our tri-type, we've got a minimum of 3 preferred parts, preferred persona, preferred personality avatars that we're deploying into the world in relation to our projected ideas of objects.
Ingrid?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Anna's had her hand up for a while.
Okay, sorry, I'm looking at the one view, not the gallery. Let me stop for a sec. Yeah, Anna?
But if you want to finish this thought, it's just a clarifying question. So I'm happy to keep waiting until you've completed what you...
Jump in. Yeah, please, Anna.
Okay, so my question, and again, I may be jumping ahead, so if you're going to cover this later, just let me know. But I notice you're grouping the types a lot into the stances, right? So like, if I understand correctly, like the 3, 7s, and 8s, primarily their concern is around the authority, is around the nurturing figure. 1, 2s, and 6s, their concern is primarily around the authority figure. 4, 5s, and 9s, primarily around the home structure.
Mm-hmm.
But in each of those stances, then you have 1 frustration type, 1 rejection type, 1 attachment type.
Yes.
So could you say a bit about, like, pick one, maybe the 3, 7s, and 8s, then how does that rejection, frustration, or attachment show up vis-a-vis the nurturing figure?
Yes. Okay, cool. Let's do that. Yeah, thank you. Actually taking me back more to the core object relations theory, because it does overlap so significantly with the Hornevian stances. You're absolutely right. And if I go here, you'll see how that looks. So we've got rejection of the nurturing figure, frustration with the nurturing figure, and the attachment dynamic with the nurturing figure. So that's exactly right. And once we've understood that the nurturing figure is an object, and we have an object relation to the nurturing figure, we can then get into how type specific those relationships are with the particular figures. So firstly, for me, that layer of understanding what are the objects and which types have particular issues with which objects, which is the Hornevians, and then understanding within the object relations themselves, what does that look like? So I actually think understanding the what is my issue with from an object relations perspective is the primary layer before we start understanding the patterns in the object relations triads. Does that make sense, Anna?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I had it right, that each archetype matched to a Hornevian stance, and then within there's each of the 3 types of object relations. It's very complicated.
It is. It's quite sophisticated, but once you see that there's a pattern, then you start being able to go up, see the overall pattern, go down, see the detail. So, and similarly, in each center, there's a rejection and attachment and frustration. So this is the genius of the Enneagram, is that you can end up knowing thousands of variations of things, but they're organized in a frame that allows you to go down, 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 to micro detail, then up, up, up. So I think the first thing there is understanding that objects start off as people, environment, home, authority, nurturing. We internalize a representation of that object, a representation of ourself as object, and then a representation or idea or understanding of our relationship to that object and how we should be in relation to it. So those are our stances. And then, you know, we've got these stances, we've got the masks, we're deploying them. And then guess what? We do that our whole growing up years and in relation to these primary figures and in our school environment and in all institutional environments and friendship groups. So our persona get refined and refined and refined. And then in adulthood, we're still doing them. And we are enacting our defensive strategies, our persona, these inner parts are deployed in all contexts and in relation to projections, not in relation to the actual person or situation we're encountering. And you know, if you can see how that is, you know, one person relates to the same boss completely differently to another, because, you know, maybe a traumatized person is only relating to their projection of what is a boss. The other person doesn't have that authority issue. They don't have an authority object that has that kind of complex in it. So they have the freedom to respond differently. They're also going to have internal objects, but they're not going to be affected by them to the same degree. So basically the idea is we acting out our object relations in adulthood through our type, through our fixations. And they come out, our object relations wounds come out in all areas of our life, because the object relations lay down a dominant affect. And the 3 dominant affects, let's actually share this poster with you. I'll actually share these slides, I think it'll be best. There are 3 dominant affects that we have in relation to different objects. And from an Enneagram perspective, they say we've got 3 basic dominant affect, and affect means feeling. So our main type has got a core feeling associated with it because of our early childhood experience. Oops, sorry. So I think I did speak about this before in my last covering of the object relations, just to loop back to it for those of you who didn't see that. So we've got a fundamental underlying dominant affect of attachment, which is I want more of that thing. I want to maintain attachment. And it's not more of, that's more frustration. I want to maintain attachment to the object. I want to perpetuate my connection to this object. So the attachment emotion has got a very particular quality. And 9s, 3s, and 6s are attachment types. So what they do, their whole strategy is designed around a core need for attachment, a core need to maintain attachment. And you can feel that in 9s, 3s, and 6s because they're good at smoothing. They're good at smoothing and connecting. And the more you work with the Enneagram, the more you start feeling it and sensing it. You know, 9s, through that strategy of false accommodation, they make you feel at ease. They make you feel that you're safe, you're comfortable, you're welcome as you are. You can assume a connection because they create a field of attachment where there's a fluidity and a spaciousness. There's a soft flow around 9s. Because they're an attachment type, their underlying dominant feeling is attachment. And for them, attachment is about the environment. It's about creating an environment of connection and ease and comfort. So that's what they're doing. And that's the feeling that they're generating to make it as easy as possible for them to maintain that and to kind of train us as well to go along with that. And all our types are training programs of some kind or another. So you can feel with 9s the attachment. With 3s, the attachment, there's an attachment to positive regard, but have you noticed how good 3s are at smoothing environments? They don't upset and alienate people and offend them. They're very good at diplomacy. Like if you think of some of the language of the tri-types, like the ambassador tri-type, 793, absolutely brilliant at being diplomatic, at saying the right thing at the right time, making people feel acknowledged in a certain way. So 3s as attachment types, very good at perpetuating connection, at creating attachment, at making people feel like that they, how do I put this? Oh, let me not get hung up on the language, but just kind of attune to your own intuitive knowledge of the types already. And 6s, perpetuating a sense of safety as an attachment type. Let me just put this in case some of you aren't super familiar with this. So 9, 3, 6 as attachment types, 1, 4, 7 as frustration types, and 8, 2, 5 as rejection types. So 9, 3, 6 as the attachment types, you can feel they're kind of blendy. They're blendy. They've got soft edges. There's an interesting dynamic that they create. And sometimes they can feel a little bit intangible because they don't want to create any dissonance in their relational field. So, you know, you won't easily know if they're in a conflict situation with someone. You know, even 6s, when they're reactive, they will be very careful about how they're reactive until they're pushed to the absolute limit. So they'll back out of a conflict situation in a way that you can't really see that they're doing it. They'll do it in a safe way to maintain attachment. Then for 1, 4s, and 7s, the underlying dominant affect, the underlying feeling of that type is frustration. So there's frustration in all of these types with early objects that then gets reenacted. So for 1s, frustration with the authority figures, frustration with authority as an object is that I can't be myself. I can't. I've got to be better. I've got to be good. So there's frustration with the self as not being good enough. There's frustration with basically everything as not being good enough. But it starts with the primary frustration of not being able to express oneself. So it's at quite a deep instinctual level that ones are disconnected from themselves and get into a relationship of frustration with themselves and with reality as a whole. With fours, the frustration with context of not being visible, not being seen. So four is the frustration in the image center. Is frustration with the lack of attunement, a lack of connection, a lack of emotional validation, and visibility. So that's the heart center version of frustration. And then for sevens, the head center version of frustration is not getting, also not safety, not attunement, but in the head center, it's mostly about questions of safety and having my needs met. So there, frustration plays out in those three types. And then in the rejection triad, 8, 2, and 5, the underlying feeling there of, I can't really trust at some level that I am lovable, that my needs matter, that I'm taken care of, that I am valuable. And there, the relationship with the object is, how do I avoid rejection? So these are the three object relations dominant affects. And you can see the qualities of those dominant affects, how they play out in the types, and how that avoidance of that feeling dominates the production of the reality strategy. Like if I'm trying fundamentally to deal with the core engine of attachment or frustration or a fear of rejection, then everything I do is built around that feeling and how I'm trying to cope with that feeling, or to moderate it, or to fulfill it. Like, how am I going to fulfill what I think is the opposite of that? So I hope that that makes sense, like the quality of those feelings. And when we start attuning intuitively to that feeling in a client, then we start being able to work with them at a different level, because we are going to a much deeper layer of the psyche, to something that's pre-verbal, that the person is grappling with every single day. And that does not mean talking about this stuff with them. It means us as a coach appreciating that there's a core engine going on inside them, and that what we end up being able to do is to help the client, if we work in a trauma-informed way, to tolerate these feelings, because all three of them are associated with a core distress. From a trauma perspective, a huge amount of our work is helping a client to tolerate a core distress so that they don't have to do their time. And that's very much what I've been learning more and more about with this stuff, is if we are able to help the client to start sitting with, staying with, noticing, being with their core object relations dominant affect, then we get very, very powerful results.
Ingrid, can I interrupt you for a moment?
Yes.
So if the tri-type, for example, is 945, and so you've got this core effect is different for my different centers. How do you bring that together? Is this just like a complex interplay, or do you work with the underlying feeling of the primary type?
I work with all three, but your example 945 is a good one, because that's a triad. That's one of the Hornevian triads. So you find that in all three of them, there's a sense of not being visible, not being safe, not being really wanted in the home and in the physical environment. And what you find with those three types is that they all disconnect from the body and the instincts and the gut center. They withdraw into imagination, fantasy, the head, and they've all disconnected from the body center. So the work with those three types would be, how do you connect with your body in the here and now, your instinctual intelligence, your gut center? How do you be here in the world and not in an idea? How do you get into the body and start experiencing your actual feelings? Because fours, people, you know, they're driven by feeling, but it's not actual staying with the feeling. It's going into self-analysis of the feeling. So fours are actually stuck in their heads a lot of the time, thinking about themselves and their struggles and how messed up am I, and what does that person think of me, and why am I such a disaster? So fours are busy up here with the feelings of the feeling center and with the shame. Fives are in the head center about the feelings that their needs don't matter and they're powerless. The head center types are very much grappling with issues of having no real power and not having an orientation to life. So they're busy head. And in the gut center, not feeling a safe sense of holding in the body, that I can fully be here. So the only way that I can be here on earth as a 9 is false accommodation, to go with the flow, because everything else feels dangerous. So I would really notice with my client if it's a triple anything, because that's very, very significant in the tri-type. But when it comes to the dominant affect of the object relations, which say it's a 9, it would be attachment. I would look at, okay, so your primary objective, your primary need is to maintain attachment by being invisible, by creating comfort, by soothing yourself, by dragging away your feelings with TV or food or whatever it happens to be. So that's going to be your primary concern, is your main type, if you're a 9. That's going to be the dominant affect of the main type. But the other two are still important because they're going to play out in different ways. So you're going to do your head type in your tri-type, and you're going to do your image type in your feeling center. And the affects of those are going to come out. They are going to play out. Let me go back to you, Marlene. Am I on the right track with your question? Is there anything you want to say?
No, it makes sense, Ingrid. And what I'm hearing is we need to work with that complexity. It is complex in different applications in different contexts. So that makes sense, Ingrid.
Yes. And the other two strategies in our tri-type are usually mobilized to support the main one. But appreciating the object relations layering is very important. Like if I'm working with a 6, if they're a 6, 8, 4, I'm going to work with them very differently to if they're a 6, 1, 2. Because you can see here, the 6, 1, 2 has got triple authority issues. Whereas the 6, 8, 4 is going to be, you know, they're dealing with a different complex of behavior. And if I'm dealing with the 6, 9, 3, that's triple attachment. That means that they are absolutely overwhelmingly driven by an attachment wound and an attachment need. So their access to assertiveness, to boundaries, to differentiation is totally different. A 684 and a 693 have got a kind of different developmental pathway because of what's available to them. Is there anything you want to say there, Marlene?
And not at this stage. Thanks, Ingrid. I think that makes sense. I'm going to have to think about it a little bit more deeply, get my head around. So comfortable at this stage.
Let me loop back to you, Anna. Are things making sense to you? And is there anything you want to add or ask? I know there's so much technical complexity here because everything layers over and over. So you can't really speak about the object relations on their own, even though there's so much to say about them. So Anna, let me just start. What are you seeing, hearing, what's making sense or not? Any questions?
I have a very specific question related to type 2 in particular. Like,
Yeah.
I can see how type 2 rejects attention. You know, like their attention directed at them by the caregiver is uncomfortable. And it's almost like the rejection types say, I'm going to do it myself. Like, I can see how the 5 rejects like a home structure in favor of reliance, self-reliance. I can see how the 8 rejects nurturing, just saying, I'm going to do it myself. How does the 2 reject authority?
They don't. Their relationship with authority is compliance. So 1s, 2s, and 6s are compliance types in the Hornevians. So 2s are going to have an external idea of what is good. Like, good girl, this is what you do. You be helpful, you be sweet, you be kind, you be concerned with other people's needs, and otherwise you're going to get rejected. So 2s don't have an internal sense of authority. They falsely attribute significance to other people's feelings and needs and thoughts. So 2s are going to be oriented towards the other and towards what the context is defining as being a good person, as being worthwhile. 1s, it's more like what is good in terms of appropriate. 2s is more like what is worthwhile around here. What is going to get you acknowledgement, approval, belonging, love. So for 2s, it's an external authority that determines how I'm going to behave. It's not my feelings that matter in what I do. I'm referenced externally to an authority interpretation of what's right. Does that make sense, Anna?
So what are they rejecting in the end? They're rejecting their own inner authority and feelings?
They are definitely rejecting their own inner authorities and feelings. They're rejecting themselves, they're repressing their feelings, they're controlling themselves. And there's that self-repression that goes with 2s. So it's a rejection of self in order to avoid rejection of the other. So what they're doing is the rejection, the word rejection refers to the core issue that they are dealing with night and day. So, and the rejection affect, the rejection feeling, driving the whole show, and their stance is in relation to authority. So it's not a rejection of authority per se, always, but to know that rejection is running the show in the 2, fear of rejection, avoidance of rejection. How do I make sure I don't get rejected is the dominant affect. And the same thing for 8s. So 2s are in the rejection triad, and they're unconsciously avoiding rejection night and day, but they do it in a very different way. They do it by making sure that you're not even going to get the chance to reject me because I don't have feelings and I don't care about yours. So, I'm too tough. You're not even going to see that there's a soft part of me that's afraid of rejection or being controlled in some way. And then for 5s, maybe also 5s, it's difficult to see that they're busy with rejection because they also hide themselves so well. that you don't realize that they're avoiding rejection because they've done it preemptively. So they've isolated themselves, giving you the subtle message that they don't really want a relationship. And so they've kind of pre-rejected themselves, and they've foreclosed on connection. So all of the rejection types are foreclosing on connection in some way or another. Connection being replaced by rejection. In the two's case, they've rejected themselves to avoid rejection. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think because it is, I think it's more straightforward to see or feel the affect in the 5 or the 8. It's less straightforward in the 2, but I love that idea of preemptively. It's almost like the child who puts themselves in a corner so that like they're punishing themselves before you can punish them. Like, I love that idea of like, I'm going to do the rejecting out of fear of being rejected. So I'm preemptively doing it so I won't feel the pain of you doing it to me.
Exactly. And that's what comes from understanding the childhood wounding, is that if we understand that that child experienced a rejecting nurturing figure, or a rejecting authority figure of some kind, or a rejection of their needs, that then they had to develop a persona that pre-did it for them, so that that tender part of themselves was kept away. It was just kept out of the picture, so that they wouldn't experience that wounding again and again. They needed to defend against rejection or frustration or a loss of attachment. So each of the early objects comes with a feeling, and then the child needs to learn to defend against that feeling in relation to the object. So, for example, yeah, 8's, the nurturing object feels rejecting because they're not protective. They're not stepping in. They're not holding. They don't feel protected as children. 8's, they feel that their own sensitivity is rejected. So they pre-reject sensitivity. 2's needs were rejected as irrelevant, like, you shush, you know, mommy's sleeping. Stop that. Go and take her a cup of tea when she wakes up. To make it very reductive. So 2's learn to reject their own feelings first. With 5's as well, not feeling that their needs are appreciated in the early holding environment. They learn to reject their own feelings and needs first. And they live small. They don't need attachment. They don't need connection. They don't need love. That's what they signal. They signal that they don't really need it because they learned to not need it. They learned to reject their own needs through their needs being rejected. So, Anna, you want to comment on anything there?
No, I just think 2's can look like attachment types because they're so obviously seeking out connection. The connection is so primordial to their like concerns, but it's interesting to think, no, they're actually a rejection type because they're not letting you see their needs.
Yes. And if you compare the 2 rejection avoidance strategy, like if you think about 9's, 3's, and 6's, there's that smoothing, blending. There's not a sense of differentiation or targeting in a way. Although 3's can sometimes look like they're spending time earning the approval of particular figures, like an authority figure or whatever, it's different. With 2's, there's something called false valuation, which is, I'm trying to get you to like me. I'm trying to get this particular leader to value and need me. I'm trying to get this particular significant other to think I'm indispensable. Or I'm trying to earn the particular love of a child. And there's that transactional earning that is quite focused with the 2. And in relationship with 2's, you can often feel that they are wanting your particular affection for them. they're eliciting something particular from you for themselves. I don't know if that makes sense to you. It's more differentiated. Whereas with the 6, the 9, and the 3, there's more of that blendy quality. Does that make sense to you? And does it ring true intuitively as a pattern?
Makes sense. Mm-hmm.
And I think we can feel it. We can feel the difference in the strategies as they're being done to us. And you also know when we're doing our strategy, it's got the particular quality underlying it. Any other questions about this? I mean, I'm not going into each of the types. There are slides here with each of them, and we looked at some of that last time. But, do you want me to go on to more specifics about the types? Yeah, Betty?
I just want to clarify. I know you've spoken at length about the rejection, but so what I'm understanding is that there's something that the 258 are rejecting in themselves. So rejection of their own needs or their rejection of their own vulnerability, but is there a rejection of the object as well preemptively? Or is it a rejection of something inside me preemptively, or is it both?
It's a mixture of them, because the object relations are about the self, the other, and the relationship between self and other. So if you look at 8s, they're rejecting their own sensitivity. They're rejecting the idea of themselves as having sensitivity. They are rejecting sensitivity per se in the world, like sentimental sensitivity is like, gross. I don't watch movies like that. It's pathetic. So it's a number of kinds of rejection that are playing out. And when we understand the Hornevian stances, we see that there's a common thread, that it's got to do with nurturing. Does that make sense?
Yes, but so in the 8, so connect the rejection and the nurturing.
So it's the rejection of the internalized representation of nurturing. So the nurturing object could be the earliest caregiver, say the mother. I'm not having a good experience with this mother. She's not protecting me. I don't feel held. I don't feel safe. And actually, she's a bit pathetic. So as a nurturing object, I internalize a representation of nurturing and nurturing figures and mother, and then I reject that. I don't like those kind of people. I don't like soft people. I don't like feelings. I don't like mushy, touchy-feely. I start having all these ideas about that kind of object. That kind of archetype is a nice way of thinking about objects. And then I hate that in myself as an object, and I develop an idea of myself and my relationship to that thing. So those are all the ways in which an object kind of constellates, if you want to put it that way. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And is the nurturing necessarily the mother? Because I've seen object relations where it's saying 378, it is mother issues particularly.
I think that's too reductive, because I've found people where it was definitely the other parent in each of these triads. That, you can find a 6 who had a very particular relationship with an authoritarian mother, or in a single parent household. So I used to say, because I also got that training, mother, father, home, and I changed it, because in some households, the authority figure is the mother, and the father's the softy, sweetie, easygoing person, and the mom's this intensely disciplinarian authority figure. But because she is the thing that impinges most on the child's psyche, they have to be a 1. So it's not gender specific.
Cool.
So yeah, that's the picture of these triads. So you see, there are 8, 2, and 5 is the types most driven by a core feeling of rejection of their own needs, and a need to preempt rejection or a need to avoid rejection. So object relations triads are describing the core affect, the core feeling, the feeling engine that caused the heart wound in the first place, the core feeling that caused that heart wound. And then the strategy is, how do I compensate for this feeling, and how do I heal this feeling? How do I not feel this terrible feeling of rejection in my heart? And the Enneagram is just the beauty of the symmetry of the symbol, is that there's one type of these in each center. So there's an action version of avoiding rejection, there's an image version of avoiding rejection, and there's a mental center version of avoiding rejection, because the underlying concerns of the centers are different. And, you know, you could go into the neurophysiology of this, but in each triad, there's one of these rejection types. And they're concerned with different things. So if we go to this, say we go to the frustration types. Here I've kind of given a bit more information on the type of frustration that each of these frustration types will be dealing with, where it comes from, and then the resulting heart wound that comes from experiencing that again and again and again and again. So when you start layering these things, you see there's the lost childhood message, the heart wound, the object relation, dominant affect, and then the Enneagram helping us to understand the nature of that frustration. So for sevens, it's frustration with the nurturing figure. I'm not being nurtured. My needs aren't being met. No one cares about me. No one cares about my needs. I'm all alone in the entire universe. And I'm not held. I'm not safe. No one cares about my needs. I'm not going to be taken care of. So I better not have feelings. And there's this desperation for feeling some sense of fulfillment, connection, safety. So the whole ego strategy then becomes about, how do I stop feeling the starvation of the heart? And in each case, there's the rich, complex way in which the ego strategy is designed to help us not to feel the heart wound that emerges from the early object relations experience. So for an Enneagram 1, the frustration with the authority figure of constantly being negated, like, I'm not allowed to do that. This is dangerous. That's not good enough. This is going to get me into trouble. Or there's total chaos here. I've got to make order myself. So there's a deficit in some way in the holding environment around issues of authority and structure and how I am allowed to be as a human being in that space. So I've got to modify myself to be able to relate to the authority environment. And there's a grief that goes along with that, because I can't be me. I'm not allowed to be me. I'm not allowed to be my instinctual self. I can't be the me that comes from my instinctual aliveness and spontaneity. I've got to get rid of that. And I've got to replace it with an acceptable version of myself. So it's a frustration, whole frustration, but with different stuff. It's from the gut center, it's the instincts, it's, it's context. Anyone want to ask anything? I know we're getting closest to time, and I haven't gotten through all the types, but hopefully I've laid some groundwork so that you can see the layering. There's the object relations experience, impingement, deficit. The experience translates into an object, and then we start having a relationship with that object based on that feeling.
Can you do the next two slides, the attachment and rejection? Can we see that detail?
Yeah, so you can have a look there, at least get a chance to look at your own type potentially. that here, the true self for the 8 replaced with armor, because the softness of my heart is not welcome here. It's rejected. It's not safe. And softness itself is rejected in this environment. It has to be rejected. For 2, true self replaced with the false abundance of I can give and give without having any feelings of my own, without having feelings and needs of my own. I can be the missing love in this environment. I can be the love that is missing in this environment. I can compensate for the lack of love, for the rejection of my needs that I experience. I can compensate for that. And with the 5, the lack of safety. Anyone want to ask anything here?
Ingrid, so I assume you're going to the next one, which is attachment. And so this is not the same, is it, as attachment theory? So attachment types, that does not imply secure attachment.
No,
And this is not avoidant attachment. It's different concepts.
yes, it's different. It's very different. The attachment theory stuff doesn't map to the Enneagram exactly. Like there are 4 different core attachment styles. There's disorganized, secure, etc. And there are interesting relationships, but attachment theory looks at it differently. And it is helpful to bring it in. Like say I'm an Enneagram 5, am I dismissive avoidant? And 5s, I think, are much more likely to be dismissive avoidant in their attachment style. But it doesn't always map out that way. It is helpful to know that stuff, though. Like if you look at 2s, they could be preoccupied in their attachment, and they could be anxious. It depends on what pattern they learned to go along with their 2 strategy of avoiding rejection. Does that make sense, Marlene?
Does make sense, yeah. That helps to clarify.
I don't think enough research has been done on that. I think that as attachment theory gets refined, it will be able to be matched to the Enneagram with more precision, because the Enneagram is just so unbelievably precise that most things can be differentiated into these 9 archetypes. And if they haven't been, I think it's a matter of time before they are. There you can hear I'm a bit of an Enneagram fundamentalist, but yeah. So yeah, attachment theory doesn't map on exactly, and attachment types are most definitely not secure attachment by default. You might well have, in any one of these triads, you could have a secure attachment style. But yeah, I don't know what percentage of the population actually does. So here you've got the 3 attachment types and how they are trying to feel attached. How are they trying to maintain attachment? So this one's more of a maintenance strategy, maintaining attachment, keeping it, preempting attachment loss and disconnection. So in this presentation, you can see how much I've gone actually into the Hornevian stances at the same time. And hopefully, just bearing in mind, the object relations is all about dominant affect, dominant feeling, the feeling that's running the show. And once you understand what feeling is running the show in yourself and your client, you start knowing where to help them to build capacity to tolerate that feeling. Like the fear of disconnection for the attachment types, the fear of loss of attachment is so huge that for threes, a 3 can't go down the line to 6 and be courageous and can't be authentic if it feels like attachment is at stake. So that core dilemma that Gabor Mate speaks about so much, attachment versus authenticity. The 3 is the archetypal attachment versus authenticity type that tells us everything about that dynamic of if I'm going to be myself and cause a disconnection, lose attachment because I'm myself, attachment wins every time. So I'm going to have the image that is going to keep me attached. So that's what this is about. Any questions on these? And if you want me to go back to any one of the other triads, we can. I can't see.
The attachment types need to tolerate the fear of disconnection. What do the rejection types and the frustration types need to tolerate?
So it's similar. For frustration types, they have to tolerate the discomfort of their own feelings of frustration. So for frustration types, there's a kind of the deficit. So for 7s, it's the frustration of wanting more, the starving heart, the hunger, the restlessness, the inner discomfort and restlessness of the here and now not being good enough. It's not enough. It's not enough. And when you know those, the postures of the different types for 7s, grasping, 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 how do I tolerate the underlying drive for grasping and grasping? It's a core restlessness, a core anxiety that I have to be able to be with. And that's why the line for 7 to 5 is non-attachment, is that I can actually be with myself in my experience in the here and now without panicking that I'm starving. So it's tolerating these feelings. For 1s, it's the tolerating the anger and the frustration of things not being okay. Like, this is not okay, the dishes haven't been washed, I hate myself, I've got to fix this about myself, oh no, I've got to start a new self-improvement project, I've got to study more Enneagram so I can be a better person, or whatever it is. So the 1 is also a core frustration that is running at an emotional level, that they've got to find some serenity of, actually, it's okay. It's okay that, you know, we didn't stick to the schedule and that person missed a deadline and, you know, I'm not perfect. So learning to tolerate that frustration. And for 4s, the tolerating the frustration of not being understood and not being seen and not feeling that somebody really, really understands me at a very deep level. Tolerating that desperate need for that frustration with, I want the perfect partner. I want to be different. I want this ideal image, idealized self, that I'm longing to be this other person. I'm envying people who've got what I want, or who are happy in ways that I want to be happy. Tolerating the self-frustration of, you know, that defectiveness, the constant sense of deficit. I've got to sit with that feeling and learn to not need to be understood, actually. And I'm only going to give up feeling that desperate need to be understood when I feel some level of equanimity, the virtue, the okayness. So the virtues describe when our core object relations affect is eased, and we don't need to do our ego to make ourselves feel better. Then we're like, okay, my dominant affect has eased. Then I can be with myself and have a holiday from my ego. From that feeling, we have a holiday from this feeling that's driving us all the time. So, any other questions about that?
David has a question.
David, sorry, I'm not seeing everyone because of the view that I'm on of the slides. Yeah, David?
Sorry about the dog. So with I'm looking at the frustration type you have up here of 7, there's a line to 1. And does that show up as well? I know because I could see I'm a 7, so the starving heart definitely within that, but also some of the elements of the 1 coming out. Is there any relationship there of where you're going to experience sort of both of those, if there's a line connection within that?
Yeah, I think that I did actually make a slide on the lines. It also depends on your tri-type. Like if you're 7-1-4, you triple frustration, which means that, that's going to be really amped up, that whole frustration thing. So I don't know whether you've got one in your tri-type, if you know, but the lines also do matter.
7-8-3.
Okay. So what I
Yeah, with 7-8-3. Yeah.
Okay. So you've got the triple assertive, what we were talking about earlier. But with 7, I put 7 here as an example. With the object relations, what I'm saying here is that the resolution of this dominant affect happens moment by moment by moment by moment. So I'm continuously, as a 7, going to be encountering frustration. I'm just wired for frustration. I'm living frustration all the time. I want more, I want different, I want other, I want an adventure, I want something in the future. I want an idealized version of myself. There's just this fundamental struggle to be with what is in the here and now in my body, because I associate with anxiety and deficit, because when I was 2 weeks old, I was inadequately nurtured. So there's a core anxiety and frustration in the nervous system, in the body, that has to be healed. And the way I see the lines is that the lines describe what happens when that frustration gets amped up down the line of disintegration, as opposed to the line of release, which tells us something about what does it feel like to heal the object relations dominant affect. What does it feel like and look like when that dominant affect starts to soften and ease? So if 7s aren't getting what they want and they aren't getting fulfilled, they end up going to 1. There's the anger and the rage and the criticism and cutting people and, and not being able to tolerate the frustration. They act it out there in one-ish ways. Whereas when they go down the line to 5, there's the non-attachment, transparency, the sobriety that helps them get there of, it's okay. It's like the Buddhist non-attachment that 7s experience when they go to 5. When they settle down and in, they realize, okay, just being is actually enough. I don't need to chase. I can settle into myself with ease and meet life on its own terms. And the high end of 5 is that sense of flow, the very Buddhist experience of just meeting the flow of life without grasping, either at an idea of self or at anything in the world. So I just put these 3 here. I was just reflecting on what this looks like. Yeah, so does that ring true for you, David?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, so I just did one of the types from each center on here just to highlight, and I think it does happen moment by moment by moment. So every single time I experience my core frustration, which I might not recognize for a long time, and I start realizing, oh, I'm restless. Okay, can I be with that? Can I be with that heart wound of the starving heart? Can I be with the anxiety and the panic of nothing? It's not okay. The now is not okay. Within the 7 pattern. And for each type, it's going to look something like that. It's about how can we go back there, or here, we didn't spend much time here. How can I be with what I'm trying to avoid or cure or fix in myself. If I'm trying to be tough and avoid vulnerability, how do I be with that in myself in a way that gradually allows for something else to emerge? For that, yeah.
I was just wondering if Rachel had a question because she's unmuted.
Yeah,
Sure.
I didn't want to interrupt, but I wanted with the last couple of minutes say this was really good presentation, and I thought you did really well. It's very informative. Just thought I would chime
Thanks,
in and
Ray.
say that.
It's
I didn't want to
lovely.
interrupt, but yeah, no problem.
Thank you, appreciate it. Yeah, so you can see when we appreciate the inner logic of type, that the whole type is designed to avoid a very painful feeling that comes from very, very, very early childhood. Then the whole type has an inner logic. We don't judge the behavior. We don't even pay that much attention to the behavior, and we don't try and convince our clients to change their behavior. From a trauma-informed perspective, what we're busy working with is help a client to build capacity and distress tolerance for the dominant affect, for their anxiety, their fear, the things that have had to be put aside in themselves as part of their kind of object relations dynamic in early childhood. So we just over time, and I mean, I'm happy to stay for a little bit if anyone wants to ask anything or refer to anything. And if you're in the room, or for people who listen to the recording afterwards, I've got 2 courses coming up that I quickly want to flash up. The one is team effectiveness, facilitating team effectiveness. And it used to be a 3-module course, but I've expanded it to 5 modules to be able to really focus on how to run the entire engagement in a corporate environment with the team, from the sales process to the positioning of the Enneagram, to doing debriefs in relation to team sessions, and then working with different aspects of the team. And one of the key things that I'm working on with this is also how to do your own qualitative and quantitative team analysis, so that you can go to your client and say, look, these are the patterns that I'm seeing. These are the dynamics that are showing up in your team. And to do that with a high level of confidence and accuracy, where you integrate your findings from the debriefing with the Enneagram team profile, which you learn to do using an Excel model that I built, and to be able to manage that engagement with your clients. And then that's starting at the end of October. And then the other one is the trauma-informed Enneagram coaching course that is starting towards the end of November. And that's the 10-month course in how to become a trauma-informed Enneagram coach. And this is a full certificate program with the IEA. I found out from one of my students that it fulfilled the full requirements for the ICF continuing professional development points for a year, which is great because I let my own ICF membership lapse years ago because no one ever asked me for it. But I know that some people who master coaches and whatever want to maintain their ICF accreditation. So this is also satisfies that. People used to come and say, does it? And I was like, I don't know, but it does, which is cool. And yeah, 10-month journey in a small group to learn trauma-informed coaching. So it's having an understanding of the types at this deeper emotional level, and to be with the ego strategy in an unshaming way. So we're not criticizing the ego, we're really helping the client to build capacity to be with their core distress in the body, in the here and now, in relationship. So that's that program. And I just finished it with me. Yeah, it's good to have you here, and I'm really glad we're connecting. Yeah, so those are the 2 things coming up. If you're interested, let me know. My prices are always negotiable and my payment terms are always negotiable. I like my Enneagram teaching to be
Is that
accessible.
different? Sorry, is that very different to the Teams course that Renata, you ran? Is that the same, or is it a different slant completely with the slides and everything?
Very different. So Renata's doing the IQ9 Teams training. Hey? It's tools for teams with how to use their team report and your practices and processes. My course is like trauma-informed Enneagram use in the workplace.
Okay.
And the relationship between the debriefings and the team process, the client communication, and a big focus on how to analyze the team and how to communicate that to the leader and to the team in a trauma-informed way. A lot working with the triads with the team, so working with the harmonic triads in a team, what processes you can do with them. So yeah, that's IQ9 that Renata does, and my training is based on my strategy consulting experience and on all my leadership development experience and with the trauma-informed lens. So you build rapport with the modality, and no, I can't go into it now, but yeah, that's a different thing. Do you want to say anything about the IQ one? You unmute.
Yeah, we're doing them in person again now, finally. So Tools for Teams was the online version, which was shortened. And the tools and the level 2, if you've done Tools for Teams, you can get a discount doing level 2, which is in person, and it's experiential and immersive. So we actually take 24 delegates and put you into 4 teams of 6 people. So you have a real Enneagram team experience. And if you haven't attended either, what you get as a bonus is when you create a team report, is you get a 77 slide workshop that's populated, custom designed for the team. That's amazing. That's got all the team data, so you don't need to spend ages creating amazing slides for your team, and it does all the calculations of the team, everything compared to, and presents it with the team leader information as well. So from the instincts to the harmonics to the Hornevians to the centers, you get all the team data and some beautiful, powerful exercises and demonstrations, and you have experiences of some of the processes and techniques and methodologies.
I think that probably the difference with mine is that there's a very strong customized element in mine. Like if you want to do really bespoke, strategically customized interventions with the client, of how do you understand their issues and customize your workshops and your processes to their specific environment. And yeah, there's quite a lot of that stuff in the program that I'm doing. So I would reckon if you've been doing kind of almost standardized team effectiveness work for a while, then you'd probably get quite a lot out of my program in terms of becoming more bespoke and refined and bringing more qualitative insight into what's going on.
If I'm honest, I actually haven't done a team report. I'm actually doing one this week but not using the team, having done individual and bringing them together. So I've done some individual sessions with two groups of 10, and then now this week, we're going to get it together, but I want to maybe to continue. So not here's the full thing and a full, but then set up workshops and let's look at different aspects. So maybe the both would, yours.
Yeah.
So can I ask? I don't know how to raise my hand.
Quickly raise something together. So in that case, what I do with a bunch of coaches is I get all the individual reports and put them into my Excel model and produce team analyses that then you could actually be able to use with your client to say, these are the team dynamics. I've got one client who uses my work so that he doesn't have to be the one giving the analysis. So he'll come and I'll do a team profile and he'll record a little video with me. And I'll say, yeah, in this team, what I see is this and this and this. And I'll do a team analysis, a little video, like a 5-minute video with him explaining what I see in the profile. And then he shows that to the client in the workshop. And then they sit there like, holy crap. You know, the Enneagram is the Enneagram. It is so freaking accurate.
It is.
He's able to say, okay, so let's see. I saw you, like James, when she said that, you started laughing. Let's talk about what stood out for you. So you know, using these team reports in that way as well is also possible. It's quite fun. Yeah. But anyway, that's a bit of a sidetrack. Anastasia, you wanted to say something?
Sorry, yes, I just wanted to ask, you kind of answered that question. I would be very interested to see how, if you linked the IQ9 team, you know, with what you're doing, yet you're taking it to another level. But it sounded like you take the individual reports, not the IQ9 team report.
I don't do the IQ9 team reports. I capture the data from whatever report people have done, looking at the instinctual sequence and the main type, weighted by main type, and I look at the tri-type. So I analyze the team. What I call full type is the instinctual sequence and the tri-type. So my Enneagram type is SX SO 794 with self-praise blind. So I do that for teams. I'll say the team is an SPSO 126 team and they've got SX blind. What does that mean? And if the leader is different to that, what does that mean? And if there's 2 layers, like I've done a lot of work in a company where we've looked at the executive team and they're SX SO 836, and 1 layer down, they've got SO SP 216. How do those 2 layers interact? With the middle managers have got self-praise blind, SX blind, and the top leaders have got SX dominant. So I do that kind of analysis. I teach you to do that kind of analysis where you can go into the organization and see the instinctual sequence in the team, what instinct is blind, bringing in Mario Sikора's work. Like if I'm an SX dominant speaking to an SX blind, I don't realize how they are seeing me. So those are the kinds of things we look at. So that's what comes out in that program. It's very much about that.
Okay,
I hope
thank
that
you very much. No, thank you. That's brilliant.
And I always like working with full type, the full instinctual sequence, the blind instinct, and the tri-type. So in the team analysis, I think you can sort of get a little tiny sense here. You know, this would be a 1-page summary of a team where I show this is the tri-type, this is the instinctual sequence of the team, and what are the strengths and weakness, and then, you know, a report speaking about the specific triggers. Like if you've got a leader who's a self-praise 3 with a 7 thinking style, how is that going to play out with a team that's got a main type 2 and a 1 and a 6 thinking style? So really exploring, what does that mean? What does that look like? How does this team get driven batshit crazy by this 3, 7-1 leader, etc.? What can't they handle? Where they're being triggered, etc. And Claudia? I'm going to stop sharing for now.
I wanted to ask a question about the other course, if that's okay.
Sure, this one.
Because you seem to be, a lot of people seem to be interested in the team one. Yeah, and it was just about the, well, actually, firstly, I wanted to say thank you for today. It was amazing. And I want to go back and watch this again, and just, I felt like it's so rich and there's so many, like you say, things mapping on top of things. And I need to actually go back and try and make sense of it all. But yeah, it's really been great. Thank you. And it was just a very practical question. The CCEUs that you mentioned, how would you claim those? It sounds like it's not going to be automatic. Is there, or would you automatically get them?
Well, I found out about the secondhand because one of my students, Rob Hutchinson, used the 5D for his full it's called CCE. Hey, sorry, I'm a bit like,
CCEUs, yeah.
and even though it's not a registered ICF program, there's enough very specific content around things like ethics, etc. So I can actually find out from him how he did that and how he allocated it. I only found out recently, much to my delight.
It's yeah, I'd love to know if that's okay. And also, how many points did he get? If you could, if you're asking him.
It's like it's as many as you need for a year. I can't remember.
Okay, well, I don't know what that is, but it sounds really promising. It's great that you can get those points, because that's something that matters to me. So
yeah, it's great. I was thrilled because I was going to spend lots of hundreds of pounds getting tucked down onto ICF and whatever, because like 3 people in the last 5 years have asked about that, but no, I'm definitely not going to. What I've done here is I've put my calendar link in the chat here. So if you do want to talk about any of these things, you can just connect with me. For 5D, I meet with everybody anyway, because the groups are quite small and I put them together carefully. So I like to meet with every single person first and make absolutely sure that it's aligned with their learning pathway and that it's right for them and they're right for the group. So if anyone's interested in that, you're welcome to connect. And what I'm doing for this, the team harmonics and the 5D, is if you want to do both of them, you can get a fat discount on the harmonics one, because that's there's a bit more space there. Yeah, so that's just giving you a sense of courses that are coming up, and it would be great if any of you want to join that. You're very welcome. The 5D, there are 2 time slots. If you're in the US time zone or Australia, they're separate slots. So yeah, I'm so glad that you enjoyed the session. And any last burning questions about anything, and including the object relations? Like, I don't want you to walk away with a headache about, damn it, that thing is bugging me. Anything sitting with you about object relations?
Okay.
That's really good.
Ingrid, I'd put in there, are there any sort of resources that you would recommend to just sort of, I'm the visual learner as well, sort of read, have, there's the tri-type material, obviously that's very much coming into this, but just anything that you could point towards that would say, yeah, if you want to take, particularly on the coaching aspect of interacting with clients.
Whoa, the coaching aspect, I think most of my stuff is synthesized into the trauma-informed coaching stuff. Yeah, the coaching stuff, I haven't really got isolated coaching specific materials that I can share with you. I'm putting my email address in here. If you can send me like specifics about areas that you want to explore. I've got so much material, it makes me dizzy to think about it. I just shared my 5D resource library with the students who are on that course. It's 23 gigs just for the AV library. So I've kind of got too much. So if you can kind of tell me more specifically what you're looking for, I can share stuff.
Great.
What are you concerned with in your coaching practice? Like, what would be most helpful? And at what depth?
I work in some different contexts. I work with faith leaders. I'm doing work in East Africa with around leadership is a passion. work with leaders. A lot of it is individual, but so I'm very fascinated with the 5-module course. So probably going to see me in that. So yeah, and even train coaches. So bringing some of this into some of that. I do a course on the neuroscience of coaching as one of the courses I teach. So this is, that integration of neuroscience and, Enneagram, the centers of wisdom, intelligence. Renata's one of my heroes, and she's had to put up with me a lot. So, that particularly the neuroscience aspect is very important to me, because I see the integration of that. So,
yeah, that's huge, because the neuroscience and the interpersonal neurobiology and the traumatology are all basically the same thing, because our type formation happens at a neurophysiological level, and the interpersonal neurobiology is fundamental. So the trauma science around brain and disconnection between parts of the brain. How much do you work with Dan Siegel's stuff?
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, that stuff is great. So the things that are part of the course materials are how to work with, well, there's a lot of leadership stuff around things like the trust equation, but then also, what am I trying to show you here? There's a lot of stuff that I use in leadership around understanding something like the tritype. And part of the course is getting materials like this that you can use with clients, where, this I like as a corporate type of thing, because it helps to make the Enneagram quite unthreatening, and the processes that go along with these kinds of materials, where, you can put clients into groups of 3 or 4 and say, okay, turn to your page that describes your tritype, which has been debriefed in a trauma-informed way, and say a process might be find a word in the archetype section that stands out for you, and do you want to tell your colleagues, you've got 5 minutes each to talk about how that resonates and how it's been a strength. And then,
and is that the Team Harmonics course that you're talking about? Okay.
Yeah. So I built all of that stuff in so that you can have stuff, to use with your clients. So for example, these are the harmonics. So, if I'm a positive outlook, triple positive outlook, how am I going to show up in a team? That's going to drive a 1, 3, 5 insane. So yeah, when you talk about coaching resources, these are the kinds of things that I produce and share as part of my courses, so that you can help in a very specific environment to interface with this stuff in a way that is accessible and relevant. And, there's a lot of biology and trauma stuff that you can link to it in how you land it.
Great.
Does that help, David?
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah. I mean, I love the Enneagram, and it's just, just curiosity and the nuance of this is a new awareness. But I'm also get frustrated with the Enneagram is that it can be so out of reach for people, because it's like it'd be complex. So the pragmatism, I was like, how do I bring this down to earth that people can, it can impact, that it can make it, because it is so powerful, it is so insightful, but it can be, so overwhelming that people go, yeah, I don't want to deal with that.
Yes.
So that pragmatism is sort of where I'm at. Yeah.
Yes, that makes
I have to run. I've made you host so that I can leave.
Okay, thanks.
Love you all. Bye.
That pragmatism is also crucial. Coming from a strategy background and working in a bank for 15 years, and knowing the kinds of people I'm working with, the strategy consulting piece is in my initial engagement with the client. What are your objectives? Where are you trying to get this organization? What are your headaches? What are your critical success criteria from this process? And designing around that in a contextually sensitive way. You know, like it's different to work with an NPO to like a group of balance sheet managers. And so, yeah, I get you on that. Relevance for me, contextual relevance is a huge thing for me.
So the way to initiate that is to email you or to set up an appointment to sign up.
Well, my diary link is there if you want to book a time to chat. I always like to do that, you know. Or you can email me for information, but it's nice to discuss, you know. And also I use those interviews to kind of customize and get questions for what I'm going to be doing.
Great. Okay. Great. Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Nice to meet you, David.
Good to meet you as well.
Before we close off, anyone want any last thoughts, so we can say goodbye? Gail?
It's always great to relook and go a little deeper and a little broader and so it's never just, and for me, I found this really helpful. It's not just a type and no stereotyping. It's just more and more deeper understanding. Yeah, like the more you know, the less you know, is how I feel.
Absolutely. And there's subtlety and dynamism, and you can't fix it. There are patterns and there's richness, but it's not, you can't nail it down.
Yeah. But it's lovely. I'm getting lots of, that are the ones I've done lately. Spot on, you know, that I'm hearing that a lot. So yeah.
Oh, brilliant. That's great. In your debriefs and things.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, it is. It's lovely. Yeah.
No, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. It's a great experience. It's like you start trusting the knowledge to be more precise.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
At the same time, less inclined to make generalizations. Yeah.
And probably also just really more receptive to who the client is as them. It's
yes.
Like, I'm with you. I'm not hiding behind my knowledge of the Enneagram.
Yes.
I'm not teaching you the Enneagram. I'm with you. And there's this thing, and how do you feel?
Yes. Correct. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Anastasia.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It has been very, very insightful. I mean, it's another layer of the Enneagram, you know, that is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So I'm very, very